Thank you.
Now let's go to the Cavs. They have a new head coach. It's Kenny Atkinson. I know you guys talked about it a lot yesterday. One of the storylines out of this is who made the decision. Dan Gilbert has always made the decision. Jason, am I correct about who the coach is going to be?
100%.
There was thought that maybe this time around, because you've made the point that he isn't involved in the minutia as much as he used to be.
Correct.
But in the end,
he's still the owner.
he still made the hire.
Yeah. And I'm playing into this because I just wrote an 800-word story that posted this morning on it. Ultimately, I don't think it's not a big deal that the owner made the call. The more of the big deal to me is that Dan's back. Dan's back in a decision-making role because for a long time he wasn't, and for health reasons, and he had to get well. It was a massive stroke that he suffered. I think to this day people don't realize how close he came to probably dying. Like, it was a major, major stroke, and so it took years for him to recover from that. So now he's back into where he is part of the day-to-day operations, not to the extent that he was before.
Sure.
It'll never go back to that way before. But when there are crucial decisions to make within the franchise, his role to that previously was very limited, and now he's got more of a voice. It's very much Koby, Nick Barlage, and Dan Gilbert. And I do think that it was close internally between Kenny Atkinson and James Borrego. Like, there was a lot of support for Kenny within the team. There was a lot of support for Borrego within the team. But all signs were pointing to it being a Borrego hire last week until the front office met with Dan, and then it was flipped and it became an Atkinson hire. He's picked every coach since he's owned the team.
Right.
Like, he picks the coach. He's the owner.
Yeah.
That's what happens. He pursued Tom Izzo, picked Byron Scott, picked David Blatt, picked Mike Brown.
Beeline.
Yeah.
Picked Beeline. Like, Dan picks the coach. He's
and the
owner.
last two coaches in Blatt and Beeline, well, they're not the last two coaches, but they're the last two coaches that weren't, we fired this guy and now let's bring in the next guy.
Yeah.
The next guy, which was, JB and Ty, those were good choices.
Yeah.
Obviously, Ty was a great choice.
Yeah.
The Beeline hire and the David Blatt hire were all-time terrible decisions by the owner. I guess the concern here, because Kenny Atkinson is clearly a way better option than the last two guys Dan picked.
Obviously.
Way better. However, the fact that the GM apparently wanted Borrego is, in the end, you're right. It's the owner's prerogative. He can do whatever the hell he wants.
Yeah.
But does it concern you that the GM wanted the other guy, or do you not trust him either? I don't know.
When this whole process started, the very first two names connected to the Cavs job, like immediately, one tweet from Woj, Bickerstaff fired. Very next tweet, Kenny Atkinson, candidate the Cavs will definitely pursue. Shams, Bickerstaff fired. James Borrego, candidate the Cavs will pursue. So the final two candidates were the first two candidates ever tied to the job.
Shams and I were talking about those names before JB was even fired.
Exactly. But I'm just saying those are the first two that publicly came out as, hey, these are two guys to keep an eye on throughout this process. Whether it was Dan, whether it was the front office, whether it was a collaboration, in this particular instance, I don't really think it makes that much of a difference because they were the two finalists and the owner or whoever ended up making the decision had a preference one way over the other.
Yeah.
And if this was a out of left field hire, if he had gone
as the last two were,
he had gone and poached someone from college with no head coaching experience or hired an assistant that wasn't talked about throughout this whole process, then I would have been a little more upset, I guess, with how it turned out. But I look at this in the way when you ask your girlfriend or your wife, do you want pizza or Chinese for dinner? And you're like, yeah, I probably prefer pizza. And she goes Chinese, and she wins that battle every time.
Every time.
And Chinese food's still delicious. Like, Kenny Atkinson is a good coach who deserved a second chance to be a head coach in the NBA.
I mean, Chinese food's delicious if you go to the right place.
You get the point I'm trying to make. So, Kenny Atkinson's a good coach. James Borrego is a good coach. It came down to personal preference. I had said on the show I like Borrego a little bit more because of some of the offensive stuff he did.
Yeah.
We're going to break down some Atkinson offensive stuff in a sec. It's not bad. I just prefer Borrego's a little bit more, but the Cavs got better yesterday, and regardless of how they came to the conclusion of landing on Kenny Atkinson to be their next head coach, they got a head coach who was deserving of the job. And at the end of the day, I think that's what matters more than the process it took to get to that announcement.
I think what matters the most, though, is how will the coach fit in with the players. And we know that Atkinson, when he was coaching young players, which is mostly what the Cavs are, seemed to fit in really well with the Nets. In fact, there was a video circulating yesterday of I'm sure you guys saw it, or maybe you didn't, of Jared Allen from an interview with J.J. Redick, I believe, earlier this year, where Jared Allen spoke extremely highly of Kenny Atkinson. And
they loved him.
And then all of a sudden the team got Durant and got DeAndre Jordan and got Kyrie Irving, and everything changed there. But until that point, it had been a good situation. And the Cavs are a young team. They're more talented than the Nets, but they do have one veteran in Donovan Mitchell who they're waiting on a big decision. And you do wonder, did Donovan Mitchell have a preference between these two guys? But I don't know.
He signed off on both.
Oh, yeah?
So, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
that's great.
He gave his blessing to either one. That contract should be announced here soon.
Yeah.
Any day now, really, the Donovan extension. So he's on board with this.
Great.
I'm just interested to see how involved Dan is going forward, because he was around the team much more this past season than he has been since the stroke.
Right.
And it was really sort of a vacuum in that ownership chair for a number of years. And I would get calls all the time, like, what's going on in Cleveland? Like, where is he? Like, what is happening there?
Right.
And they tried putting Grant in place, his son.
Right.
And I really like Grant. Like, I'm on record with, like, I think he's a really good kid, but he's a kid. He just graduated college.
Right.
Like 4 years ago.
Wasn't ready for that.
Wasn't ready for that. Yeah, but there was nobody else.
Right.
So he was doing the best he could and trying to learn different. But there was no one else within the family to take that role. So it was. I likened it in the story I wrote today. I said it was Logan Roy returning from Succession. Logan Roy returning to reclaim his business.
Yeah,
and that's what,
because his son was in that case. His son was a nitwit.
Right? Yeah, that's not
not the case here.
It was more here of there is nobody else
to
fill that ownership vacuum.
Yeah,
and so again, it's a much different Dan. He's not irascible and this angry wrath of Dan that people felt in that organization for years. That part is probably gone forever. It will never come back. But Dan returning in a decision-making capacity, I think that's the more significant part. It's just the fact that they have an owner again on the throne who is part of the decision-making process that they did not have before.
I wonder, guys, if this hiring means that Jared Allen is more likely to stay with the Cavs now, because it seems like they have a good relationship.
Part of the reason he got fired in Brooklyn was he wanted to start Jared Allen over DeAndre Jordan.
That's right, yeah.
And Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving were like, no, DeAndre's our guy. He should be the starter. And that's not necessarily what caused the initial friction between Atkinson and the Stars in Brooklyn, but that certainly didn't help ease any of the tension that had already been building up.
Do you think he's more likely to stay, Jason?
I don't think he's more likely to stay just because Kenny's the coach.
Right.
I think there's still a lot to be sorted out this summer with the Cavs.
Yeah.
And I obviously it's a good thing that Jared and Kenny have history together, and obviously there's a mutual respect there, and so I think that's wonderful. I just wouldn't look at it and say, oh well, Kenny's the coach, so Jared's not going anywhere.
Right.
I still
not 100% certain, but who knows, right? And I brought Fedor on my podcast yesterday, and he thinks there's a reasonable chance that they're putting this all on JB, and they're like, we have 4 real talented players. If we have a more creative offensive coach, maybe we can win with this group. Do you buy that?
That's what they're selling publicly right now. That's what they're telling. They're telling other teams, we're not breaking this up. We'll wait and see. Nothing has happened yet, other than the coach.
Yeah.
No actionable move has been made. Donovan hasn't signed the extension.
Right.
It's still June. We haven't even gotten to the draft yet.
Draft's tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Tomorrow.
They are very much putting up a united front of we are running this back. And I've talked about it before. Like, that was the plan before things went sideways a little bit in that Boston series. The plan was to run it back with all 4 of those guys. Right. So Chris very well may be right. And I've said before, I wouldn't make a trade just for the sake of making a trade. You've got to make yourself better. But they could have some really interesting decisions that they're forced into making here in the next couple of weeks.
I think the question, Mike, and you go first on this, is alluding to what you just said. The Cavs could say what they want publicly, but down in the deep depths of the Q, or the Rock now, do they really believe they need to change for change's sake? Or are they only going to change if they could get Jimmy Butler or Paul George or one of those elite level players, even if they're older? What do you think?
What do I think they think?
What do you think they think, and what do you think personally?
I mean, I know from experience of when you assemble something, you want to see it through. When you're the architect and put something together, if you're building a house, you may go through a bad contract. We'll talk about Director Steve's deck.
No, boy,
Director Steve's going to finish that damn deck, whether he dies before it happens or not. And Steve's getting up there in age, so you never know. But I love you, Steve. But like Steve wants that deck to be built. He's going to see it through the end despite some of the turbulence that he's gone through in this process of building a deck, which started before I met Steve and is still going on to this day. So when you're the architect, if you're Koby Altman, of course you want to see the core four you put together flourish into the maximum ability that it could be.
Right.
What that ceiling is, in my opinion, versus what Koby Altman may think, could be totally different. I think fundamentally speaking, the core four as itself has proven over the course of 2 postseasons that it has a limit. And that limit is we could win a playoff round and we could probably compete, but we're not competing at the highest of levels. But I'm also not going to break it up for bits and pieces just for the sake of breaking it up. Before yesterday's hire, I was pretty sure that if you had to trade one or the other, Allen was the one I'd be willing to sacrifice in a trade because, A, his salary at $20 million a year is easier to get quote-unquote pieces back for as opposed to another star. You're probably trading the best player in Allen, but the guys you can make up because of the spacing it would provide and some flexibility on the wing, maybe those pieces of the puzzle, as Jason likes to say, fit better together. With Garland's $43 million salary, like it's tough to put those pieces together to match that, to equal what you actually are losing in Darius Garland. Now,
and another part of this, Mike, is also that Jarrett Allen's coming off arguably his best season.
And his value's the highest.
Whereas Darius Garland's coming off his worst season.
I did tell Jason yesterday, we talked on the phone, I was like, well, I had the same thought as you. Maybe it's not as likely that Allen's the guy who gets traded. Maybe it is DG now because of the chemistry that Atkinson and Allen has. But I think Jason's right in the big picture. A head coach is going to come in and reevaluate this roster. Right. And Jarrett Allen is not the same player he is today that he was in Brooklyn. And I'm sure the offensive scheme that Kenny Atkinson deploys in Cleveland, which will break down in about 5 minutes, will be a little tweaked and changed from what he did in Brooklyn 4 years ago. The NBA's changed a ton in 4 years, offensively and defensively. So some of the things that worked that he ran in Brooklyn, he'll probably have to tweak a little bit in Cleveland on a defensive standpoint, exactly the same. So they do have that built-in chemistry and the rapport, but I don't think that makes him safe. Same with Karis LeVert, by the way. Karis LeVert certainly isn't safe if he's in trade talks just because Kenny Atkinson's the head coach either.
To your initial question, I believe the Cavs want to see this through with these four. They don't want to break. Like, I believe that part. Like, they do want to see this through. I also believe that there are outside forces that could work against them to prevent that from happening.
Darius's agent?
Agents get involved, player wishes, who wants to play with whom, that sort of thing. So forces beyond their control may dictate what they have to do. But, like, if you take that out of it and just if the Cavs are evaluating their roster and how they want to move forward, I absolutely believe that they want to move forward with those 4 pieces intact. I'm not convinced it's going to be feasible.
Mike said just a minute ago he thinks they've proven that there's a ceiling to this group. And I've been, you guys know the basketball way better than I do, but I've been consistently like, you got to break it up, you got to break it up. And I've had a little bit of a second thought here that if you do have a better coach, JB did not run an offense, essentially, right? And the players were frustrated by his lack of creativity, and they lost faith in him. Do we know for sure what the ceiling of this team is? Because clearly, Evan Mobley, or I shouldn't say clearly, I think we're all pretty confident that Evan Mobley has not reached the ceiling of his talent.
Correct.
And you could even argue Darius Garland hasn't, at least not in the last 2 years. So if you could find a coach that could bring out the best of those guys, then maybe we don't know the ceiling of this group together for sure, because maybe this new coach, if he ends up being the right guy, can get more out of it, and then they can win at the highest level with this group.
Well, I think that's the point I've made a couple times, maybe in a poorly phrased way, of there's more in there with Evan. Now, how do you get to it? I don't know. They haven't gotten to it yet.
Does Kenny Atkinson have the answer? Maybe. But we don't know.
And I think Mike probably has some footage to show you that maybe. And Darius and Donovan played fine together last year. This year did not go well, but last year the numbers were better. So, and Darius has regressed. Ever since he signed the contract, he hasn't emerged as that player that they expect him to be. He certainly hasn't played like a $40 million player in the NBA. So that is why you have to wonder what more is there to get out of this. Certainly, you have to feel like there's another gear or two to get out of it. The question is if Kenny Atkinson is the one to bring it out. And we're going to find out.
Can you get the most out of Evan and Darius or Donovan or Jarrett if they're all playing together?
Right.
Or do they have to be spread up and split up?
Right.
To then maximize, and it's more of the bigs, in my opinion, than the guards. Can Evan become the best version of Evan Mobley playing alongside another big who's not a shooter just because of spacing issues?
All right, so let's